to show you 4 different ways to cut art prints. And the first is with scissors. You're going to want to use a really sharp set of scissors. I use scissors whenever I'm wanting to cut a print to frame. I just have one. I'm not trying to cut a whole bunch of them. And I'm also not trying to make the cuts super precise. So this means that if you are a person who just like bought an art print and you want to cut it, using scissors is just fine if you intend to put it in a frame directly afterward, because you won't ever really see that the edges might not be perfectly straight, because you're never going to get a perfectly straight edge with a set of scissors. That said, I'm not going to show you exactly how to cut a print with scissors because it's fairly obvious. You just cut around the border, you use the border of the image as your guide, and you just cut around it and then you place it in your frame. That's the correct size, the same size as your print once it's cut out. I also wanted to make sure that you know that everything's linked in the description, all the supplies I discuss in this video. So if you see something that you want to use to cut your art prints with, it'll be down there for you. Next method is an X-Acto knife and straight edge. And I gotta warn you ahead of time, before using an X-Acto knife, these can be very dangerous. You can cut yourself super easily, so be extra careful. And that's why I don't use this method of cutting my prints very often. But if you don't have access to any of the other cutters that I'm about to show you, this is a way to very affordably cut a print and get a very precise straight edge. So in order to use an X-Acto knife to cut, what you're going to want to have is your straight edge. I like to use a metal ruler for this, and then a cutting mat. The cutting mat is important because if you are cutting stuff with an X-Acto knife, you're going to mess it all up. If you have just like a wood tabletop underneath, you want to make sure to use a cutting mat so you don't damage whatever is underneath. Then you take your print and carefully line up everything so that there's an exact straight edge, and then there you go. Now, I didn't quite get it cut all the way through like I should. So what I'm going to do is keep pressing down on this and just reinforce that cut all the way through, just to make sure, because you have to push down pretty hard if your paper's thick like mine is, because I have a 300 GSM cotton rag paper, so it's fairly thick. So just make sure you have the cut on there, and you can see how some of it frayed off because I was cutting over it a couple of different times. So ideally, you want to just make one solid cut that goes all the way through, but this looks very nice on here and it's perfectly straight. And I think it goes without saying, but if you want to continue to completely cut out your print, then you just continue cutting on all the other 3 sides with your X-Acto knife. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to show you how to cut these prints out some other ways. Next, we're going to use what's called a guillotine style cutter. With one of these cutters, you want to be very careful to always keep your hands on this side of the protective bar. You don't want them under here because you're getting ready to bring down a very sharp cutter. What you'll do is you just line everything up in here so that it's perfectly even. And this is super important because if you have this thing cockeyed, it's not going to cut straight. So you want to make it as even as possible. I like to keep one hand on this to hold it down and keep it straight. Then we just make our cut. Easy as that. The guillotine style cutters are not good for everything. For example, if we would have messed up on our cut down here and had it slightly off and we needed to adjust it by like this tiniest little hair, just a little bit, most guillotine cutters will not cut that precisely. Also, if you had a really big piece of paper that you needed to cut, like something maybe 22 inches wide, for example, a guillotine style cutter is usually not that large. In either of those cases, or if you just want to make sure you have the most precise control possible with the most advanced cutting, then you're going to want to step up and use one of these cutters. This is a Dolly 554. So you can see you can fit pretty large pieces of paper in here. This type of cutter is very sharp and super precise. What you do is you feed your paper in here and then you use this and you bring it across back and forth to cut. So what you want to make sure is to never put your hands like under here like I'm doing like this. Don't ever do this while you're cutting it. You want to keep your hands behind this guide. So the one hand here and one hand here, and you'll be safe. But never move this over and have your hands under here because there are very sharp cutters on here. Depending on which style of these and which brand you get, there are very sharp blades under there. So just keep your hands behind here where they need to be so they're safe. It's got a circular blade under here, you can see, and this allows you to cut in either direction. So what you want to do is you want to take your paper and you line it up, and with this cutter, you line it up out here is where it's going to cut. So you line it up as precisely as you can, and then you just make your cut. You can see this one is cut perfectly. This one is not, because I did not have the prints lined up perfectly when I printed them. So this is not a cutter issue. This was how I arranged them on the paper. But this cutter can make very slight adjustments. So what we're going to do is cut out some more of these, and then I'm going to show you how we make an adjustment on that. So this is a perfect example of what this cutter can do that a guillotine cutter will not be able to do. Sometimes you will make a cut and you see how there's just a little bit of white there, and then down here there isn't. It was because I didn't have it perfectly aligned. And so you want to cut this smallest little sliver off without cutting a whole bunch of your print off, and you want it still to look straight. And this is why you invest in one of these cutters, because you can fix that with this. And with the other types of cutters, it's harder to fix. So in this case of making a very precise cut, what I like to do is make sure that I can see this really good where it's cutting, because you have to have it lined up just in the smallest little amount out of the way, and then we make our cut. Okay, and you can see it shaved off this tiny little bit, but it fixed what we had done to our print. And you can see I have also a little white showing right here. Maybe that's barely noticeable, but I'm going to go ahead and fix it because I can take off the smallest little amount. And this cutter cuts in either direction. So we got our little sliver of paper, and now we have our perfect 5x7 print. If you'd like to learn more about making your own art prints, I have a playlist. It's basically a free course right here on YouTube that shows you everything you need to know about making your own prints. So you can watch that here. All right, thank you so much for watching. I hope this video helps. See you next time.